In a quiet suburban neighborhood, where tree-lined streets and friendly faces created a sense of calm, Michelle Thompson lived a simple yet fulfilling life. She was a dedicated schoolteacher who spent her days shaping young minds and her evenings enjoying the peaceful rhythm of her home. Her husband, Marcus Thompson, was often away on what she described as business trips. To their neighbors, he seemed like a reserved man with a mysterious air about him. But no one suspected that Marcus was one of the most respected and feared Delta Force commanders in the United States military. On this particular evening, Michelle's day had been long but rewarding. The kids in her class had aced their math test, and she felt a deep sense of pride knowing she played a part in their success. As she drove home from work, she decided to stop at the local grocery store to pick up ingredients for dinner. It was just another ordinary errand, or so she thought. As Michelle pulled into the parking lot, she noticed two police cars parked near the entrance. At first, she didn't think much of it. Perhaps they were helping someone or conducting routine patrols. But moments later, flashing lights appeared behind her car. Confused, Michelle glanced at her speedometer. She hadn't been driving recklessly or breaking any rules. Still, she pulled over, assuming there must be some misunderstanding. The officers approached her car, their body language tense and unwelcoming. One of them leaned down to speak to her through the window, his tone sharp and accusing. "Do you know why we pulled you over?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. It was more like an accusation. Michelle shook her head politely, explaining that she hadn't noticed anything unusual about her driving. Instead of accepting her explanation, the officer began listing vague reasons for stopping her. He mentioned something about speeding, even though Michelle knew she'd been well within the limit. Then came comments about her car being too nice for someone like her, implying that maybe she couldn't afford it. When Michelle calmly pointed out that these accusations weren't based on facts, the situation took a turn for the worse. The second officer joined in, mocking her profession and suggesting that teachers probably didn't understand how traffic laws worked. Their tone grew increasingly disrespectful, laced with thinly veiled insults that hinted at prejudice. Michelle tried to remain composed, reminding herself that losing her temper wouldn't help the situation. But as the minutes ticked by, it became clear that this wasn't just a routine traffic stop. It was something more sinister. One of the officers suddenly reached for her arm, gripping it tightly under the pretense of checking her license. His action startled Michelle, and instinctively, she pulled away. That's when things escalated. The officers accused her of resisting arrest, raising their voices, and making a scene right there in the parking lot. Passers-by started filming the interaction on their phones, capturing the tension between Michelle and the aggressive pair. What the officers didn't know was that Michelle wasn't alone. Back at home, Marcus had received an alert from a security app linked to Michelle's phone. Designed to notify him in case of emergencies, the app sent live updates straight to his device, even though Marcus was thousands of miles away. Finishing up a top-secret mission overseas, he immediately sensed that something was wrong. Watching the footage sent chills down his spine, not because he doubted Michelle's strength, but because he knew exactly what kind of power he could wield if needed. For now, Michelle stood firm, refusing to let fear dictate her response. Little did the officers know, they had picked the wrong person to bully. And far away, Marcus was already planning his next move. Months had passed since the incident, and while life in the Thompson household had returned to its quiet rhythm, the ripple effects of Michelle's courage continued to spread far and wide. The case became a touchstone in discussions about accountability and reform, cited by activists, educators, and policymakers alike. It wasn't just a story of one woman standing up against injustice. It was a blueprint for how communities could come together to demand change. Michelle found herself invited to speak at schools, community centers, and even national conferences. Her speeches were never fiery or overly dramatic. Instead, they carried a quiet power that resonated deeply with audiences. She spoke candidly about her experience, how fear had gripped her during the confrontation, but also how determination had pushed her forward. Courage isn't the absence of fear, she often said. It's choosing to act despite it. Those simple words inspired countless individuals to take small yet meaningful steps toward justice in their own lives. Her students noticed the difference too. The once shy Jamal who had thanked her with a note became more outspoken, joining the school's debate team and advocating for issues like anti-bullying campaigns. Other students followed suit, organizing fundraisers for local charities and hosting workshops on racial equality. Michelle watched with pride as her classroom transformed into a space where young minds weren't just learning math and science. They were learning empathy, resilience, and the importance of standing up for what's right. Marcus, meanwhile, remained a pillar of strength behind the scenes. Though he rarely attended public events or sought recognition, his presence was felt in subtle ways. Neighbors whispered stories of how Marcus had quietly helped resolve disputes in the community, mediating conflicts between residents and ensuring fairness prevailed. His reputation as a man of integrity only grew stronger, earning him respect not just locally but among his peers in high-ranking circles. People knew better than to underestimate him, and more importantly, they understood that crossing someone under his protection came with consequences. The legacy of Daniels and Gray served as a cautionary tale within law enforcement agencies nationwide. Their suspension paved the way for stricter oversight measures, including mandatory ethics training and independent review boards to handle complaints against officers. While some argued that progress was slow, others acknowledged that lasting change required patience and persistence. Michelle's case reminded everyone that accountability wasn't just a buzzword. It was a necessity for rebuilding trust between law enforcement and the communities they served. Back home, Michelle and Marcus cherished their moments of peace. They took long walks through the neighborhood, cooked meals together, and spent evenings reading side by side. Yet beneath the surface, there was an unspoken understanding. They had weathered something extraordinary, something that had tested their strength and unity. And though they preferred a quiet life away from the spotlight, they carried the knowledge that they had made a tangible difference, not just for themselves but for future generations. One day, Michelle received a letter from a young girl named Amina living in another state. In neat handwriting, Amina wrote about how Michelle's story had inspired her to stand up to bullies at school. "I used to think I couldn't do anything because I'm small," Amina wrote. "But now I know that even small voices can make big changes." Michelle read the letter aloud to Marcus, tears welling up in her eyes. For all the challenges they'd faced, moments like this reminded them why it had been worth it. As time went on, the memory of Daniels and Gray faded from headlines, replaced by new stories of hope and resilience. But Michelle and Marcus knew their fight wasn't over. It would never truly be over. Justice wasn't a destination. It was a journey, one that required constant vigilance and effort. Still, they approached each day with gratitude for their love for their community and for the opportunity to leave the world a little better than they'd found it. And so their lives continued, marked by humility, purpose, and an unwavering belief in the power of doing what's right. Whether teaching a classroom, leading a mission, or simply sitting together under the stars, Michelle and Marcus embodied the idea that true strength lies not in domination, but in service. They weren't heroes seeking glory. They were ordinary people who chose to rise when it mattered most. And in doing so, they proved that even in the face of adversity, light could shine through and inspire others to do the same. By the time Marcus stepped off the military transport plane, his mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. The long hours of the flight had given him plenty of time to process what he'd seen in the video footage and plan his next move. He wasn't angry in the reckless, impulsive way some might expect. Instead, his anger burned slow and steady, like embers smoldering beneath ash, controlled but capable of igniting into something far more intense when needed. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice, and Marcus knew exactly how to deliver it. The first thing he did upon landing was check in with his most trusted contacts within the military and intelligence community. These weren't casual acquaintances, They were people who owed him favors or respected his position enough to cooperate without asking too many questions. Within hours, Marcus had access to detailed profiles of the two officers involved in the incident. Their names, ranks, disciplinary histories, family backgrounds, financial records, and even personal habits. Nothing escaped his attention. Every piece of information was a tool he could use if necessary. Marcus also reached out to old friends embedded in law enforcement agencies across the country. While he didn't explicitly ask them to intervene, he made sure they were aware of the situation. Word spread quickly among those in power that someone very important, a man whose reputation commanded both fear and respect, was watching closely. It wasn't a threat. It was a subtle reminder that actions have consequences. By the end of the day, whispers about the incident had begun circulating through police departments nationwide. Back at home, Michelle was trying to settle back into her routine after the traumatic encounter. She had spent the morning drafting a formal complaint against the officers, determined to hold them accountable for their behavior. Though she still felt shaken, she refused to let the experience break her spirit. Teaching had always been her passion, and she found solace in preparing lesson plans for her students. Still, there were moments when the memory of the confrontation crept into her mind, leaving her feeling uneasy. When Marcus walked through the door later that evening, Michelle looked up from the kitchen table where she'd been working. Her face lit up with relief at the sight of him, though she couldn't hide the lingering tension in her eyes. Marcus didn't say much at first. He simply wrapped his arms around her, holding her close as if to shield her from the weight of the world. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. In that quiet moment, Michelle felt safe again, knowing that Marcus was there to stand by her side. Once they sat down together, Marcus listened intently as Michelle recounted every detail of the incident. His expression remained calm, but his jaw tightened slightly with each new revelation. When she finished speaking, Marcus placed a reassuring hand on hers. "You handled yourself perfectly," he said, his voice steady and firm. "But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." Over the next few hours, Marcus laid out his plan. He explained how he'd already gathered evidence and alerted key players within the system. He assured Michelle that the officers would face consequences, not because of who he was, but because of what they had done. Marcus emphasized that everything would be done legally and ethically, using the same precision and discipline that guided all of his missions. But privately, he knew that sometimes justice required more than paperwork and official channels. Before heading to bed, Marcus took a moment to reflect. He thought about the countless operations he'd led throughout his career, missions that demanded split-second decisions and carried life-or-death stakes. Yet, none of those experiences compared to the surge of protectiveness he felt now. To Marcus, Michelle wasn't just his wife. She was his partner, his confidant, the person who reminded him of what truly mattered in life. Anyone who dared harm her or undermine her dignity would soon learn that crossing Marcus Thompson came with a price. As the night wore on, Marcus began making calls, sending encrypted messages, and setting events into motion. He operated with the same efficiency and focus that defined his work in the Delta Force, ensuring that every step was calculated and deliberate. By morning, the groundwork for accountability had been laid. The officers may not have realized it yet, but their lives were about to change, and not in ways they'd anticipated. Marcus wasn't just coming for them. He was dismantling the illusion of invincibility they'd built around themselves, and once he started, there would be no turning back. In the weeks following the suspension of Officers Daniels and Gray, Michelle found herself reflecting deeply on everything that had happened. The whirlwind of emotions, anger, fear, frustration, and finally relief, had left an indelible mark on her. But more than anything, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about using her experience to inspire others and spark meaningful change. Her story became a catalyst for conversations about accountability, racial bias, and police reform, not just in her community but across the country. Local news outlets invited her to share her perspective, and national platforms picked up the narrative, highlighting how one woman's courage had exposed systemic flaws. Michelle didn't shy away from these opportunities. Instead, she embraced them, speaking candidly about the importance of standing up against injustice, even when it felt daunting. "If I can do it," she often said during interviews, "anyone can." At school, Michelle noticed a shift among her students. They approached her with questions, admiration, and even stories of their own experiences with unfair treatment. She used these moments to teach them about resilience, empathy, and the power of using their voices. One day, after class, a shy seventh grader named Jamal handed her a note. It read, "Thank you for showing us we don't have to stay quiet." Michelle kept that note tucked inside her desk drawer, pulling it out whenever she needed a reminder of why she fought so hard. For Marcus, the aftermath brought its own kind of reflection. Though he rarely sought recognition, he couldn't deny the role these quiet interventions had played in holding Daniels and Gray accountable. His actions weren't about flexing power or intimidating people. They were about leveling the playing field. He believed deeply in justice, not just as a concept, but as something tangible that could be achieved through discipline, strategy, and unwavering resolve. Watching Michelle handle herself with such grace and strength only reinforced his belief in fighting for what was right. The couple returned to their peaceful routines, finding comfort in the simplicity of everyday life. Michelle resumed her morning walks through the neighborhood, greeting neighbors who now looked at her with newfound respect. Marcus spent weekends tinkering with projects around the house, occasionally disappearing for short trips related to his work. Yet, despite the calm exterior, both of them carried the knowledge that they had made a difference, not just for themselves, but for countless others. Meanwhile, Daniels and Gray faded into obscurity, their names synonymous with disgrace. Their families struggled to cope with the fallout, grappling with shame and financial strain as legal fees piled up. Friends and former colleagues distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with men whose actions had tarnished the badge they once wore proudly. It was a stark reminder that misusing power came with consequences far beyond immediate punishment. It rippled outward, affecting lives in ways they could never fully anticipate. In the broader context, Michelle's case became a landmark moment in discussions about law enforcement accountability. Community leaders cited it as proof that public pressure and transparency could lead to real change. Activists used it to push for policy reforms, including mandatory body cameras, stricter oversight of officer conduct, and better training on implicit bias. While progress was slow, the momentum generated by Michelle's story kept the conversation alive. As months passed, Michelle and Marcus began receiving letters and messages from people all over the world. Some shared their own struggles with injustice, thanking Michelle for giving them hope. Others expressed gratitude for Marcus's example of protecting loved ones without resorting to violence or recklessness. Each message reminded them that their actions had resonated far beyond their small suburban neighborhood. One evening, as they sat together on their porch watching the sunset, Michelle turned to Marcus with a smile. "You know," she said softly, "we didn't just win this fight for ourselves. We did it for everyone who's ever been told they're powerless." Marcus nodded, squeezing her hand gently. He didn't need to say anything. They both understood the weight of what they'd accomplished. Though life moved forward, Michelle and Marcus knew they would always carry the lessons of this journey. For Michelle, it was a reminder of the strength found in vulnerability and the courage required to stand up for oneself. For Marcus, it was a testament to the idea that true leadership meant empowering others, even if it meant staying in the shadows. Together, they'd proved that love, determination, and integrity could overcome fear and prejudice, and that sometimes the quietest battles leave the loudest echoes. The two officers, let's call them Officer Daniels and Officer Gray, had always prided themselves on their ability to skate through sticky situations. They'd been part of the force long enough to know how things worked. Complaints got buried, investigations stalled, and public outrage eventually fizzled out. So when they showed up for their shifts in the days following the incident with Michelle, they acted as if nothing unusual had happened. To their coworkers, they joked about the sassy teacher who thought she could challenge their authority. But privately, both men couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Officer Daniels lived in a modest suburban home with his wife and 2 kids. He liked to spend weekends tinkering with his prized hunting rifle, a family heirloom he boasted about during poker nights with fellow officers. One Saturday morning, as he stepped onto his front porch to grab the newspaper, he froze. His rifle lay disassembled on his lawn, its parts neatly arranged like pieces of a puzzle. The barrel, stock, and trigger mechanism gleamed under the sunlight, as if mocking him. Panic surged through him. How had someone dismantled his gun without setting off the security system? And why go through the trouble just to leave it there? Meanwhile, Officer Gray woke up Monday morning to find an envelope taped to his car windshield. Inside were documents detailing his questionable financial dealings, loans he hadn't disclosed to his superiors, overdue credit card payments, and even a suspicious deposit linked to a local business owner. Gray's hands trembled as he read through the pages. No one outside his inner circle knew about these issues, who had access to such sensitive information. And more importantly, what did they want from him? Neither officer dared speak openly about the strange occurrences. Instead, they exchanged nervous glances during roll call, each wondering if the other was experiencing similar anomalies. Their colleagues noticed the tension but chalked it up to stress over the ongoing investigation into the traffic stop. After all, internal affairs investigators had begun asking pointed questions about past incidents involving the pair. Complaints that had once been swept under the rug were now resurfacing, forcing Daniels and Gray to answer for years of unchecked behavior. Unbeknownst to them, Marcus Thompson was orchestrating every move from the shadows. Using his extensive network of contacts, he ensured that subtle yet unmistakable warnings reached the officers' lives. It wasn't about revenge. It was about sending a message. Marcus wanted them to feel the weight of accountability, to understand that their actions had consequences. He didn't need to confront them directly. Sometimes, the unknown was scarier than any face-to-face encounter. Back at home, Michelle continued her daily routine, finding solace in teaching and spending time with friends. She remained hopeful that justice would prevail, though doubt occasionally crept in. Each night, Marcus updated her on the progress he'd made, careful not to reveal too many details. "They're starting to feel the pressure," he told her one evening, his voice calm but firm. "It won't be long before they realize they can't hide anymore." Public support for Michelle only grew stronger as the story gained traction. Local activists organized rallies outside the police station, holding signs that read "Justice for Michelle" and "Accountability now." News outlets interviewed witnesses from the parking lot incident, further amplifying the call for reform. Even some members of the police department began speaking out, urging transparency and fairness in handling the case. For Daniels and Gray, the walls were closing in. Every shift felt heavier than the last, every interaction fraught with paranoia. They started second-guessing themselves, questioning whether they were being followed or monitored. Sleep became elusive, replaced by restless nights filled with unease. Though they still tried to maintain their tough exteriors, cracks were beginning to show. Marcus watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. He didn't need to step into the spotlight. His work behind the scenes was enough to ensure that justice stayed on course. For him, this wasn't about flexing power. It was about protecting those who mattered most. And as the investigation intensified, it became increasingly clear that Daniels and Gray wouldn't escape unscathed. Their days of bullying and misconduct were finally catching up with them. And this time, no amount of bravado could save them. As the city buzzed with anticipation, Michelle found herself reflecting on the bigger picture. This wasn't just about her. It was about challenging systems of injustice and standing up for what was right. With Marcus by her side and an entire community rallying behind her, she felt ready to face whatever came next. Whatever the outcome, one thing was certain: Daniels and Gray. The tension in the parking lot continued to build as Michelle tried her best to keep her composure. The two officers seemed more interested in asserting their authority than addressing any real issue. One of them jotted down notes on a notepad, occasionally glancing up to mutter something dismissive or sarcastic. The other paced around her car, shining his flashlight unnecessarily into the windows, as if searching for some hidden excuse to escalate the situation further. Michelle's heart raced, but she refused to let fear take over. She reminded herself that she hadn't done anything wrong, and that remaining calm was her best defense. Still, it was hard not to feel overwhelmed. The officers' words stung, not just because they were unfair, but because they carried an undertone of disrespect that went beyond the moment. Their tone suggested they believed they could treat her however they wanted simply because of who she was. A black woman driving a nice car in a neighborhood where people like her weren't always seen as equals. As the confrontation dragged on, one officer made a remark about how Michelle probably got the car from someone else, implying she couldn't have earned it herself. Another joked about whether teachers even knew what a speed limit was, reducing her profession to a punchline. Passers-by continued recording the scene, shaking their heads at the blatant display of arrogance and prejudice. Some whispered words of support to Michelle, while others simply stood by, unsure of what to do. It wasn't until one of the officers grabbed her arm again, this time with unnecessary force, that Michelle felt her patience slipping. She pulled away firmly, her voice steady but firm. "You're hurting me," she said, staring directly at him. "I haven't broken any laws, and I deserve to be treated with respect." Her words hung in the air, daring them to respond. For a brief moment, there was silence. Then, the second officer stepped forward, his posture aggressive, accusing her of resisting arrest. That's when Michelle realized this wasn't going to end quickly. These men weren't interested in justice. They were looking for domination. But deep inside, Michelle found strength. She thought of all the times she taught her students about standing up for themselves, about using their voices when no one else would listen. If she backed down now, what kind of example would she set? So, she held her ground, refusing to let intimidation win. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, Marcus Thompson sat in a secure military facility, scrolling through the live footage sent to his phone. At first glance, he might have looked like any other soldier winding down after a mission. His rugged face showed signs of exhaustion, and his uniform was still dusty from days spent in harsh conditions. But beneath his calm exterior, Marcus was a man who thrived under pressure, a leader trained to assess situations, calculate risks, and act decisively. When he saw the footage of Michelle being mistreated, something inside him shifted. He had known his wife was strong. He'd seen her handle challenges most people would buckle under. But watching strangers treat her with such blatant disrespect ignited a fire within him. To Marcus, Michelle wasn't just his partner. She was his equal, his rock, the person who kept him grounded despite the chaos of his life. And nobody messed with her without facing consequences. Using his connections, Marcus began gathering information on the officers involved. Their names, badge numbers, disciplinary records, all of it flowed into his hands within minutes. Years of working in high-stakes environments had taught him how to move discreetly yet effectively. He didn't need to storm into the local police station or make dramatic threats. Instead, he worked quietly, methodically, ensuring that every piece of evidence against the officers was documented and ready to be exposed if necessary. Back in the parking lot, Michelle finally managed to defuse the situation enough to drive away, though not before receiving a citation for speeding, a charge she knew wasn't justified. As she sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel tightly, tears welled up in her eyes. It wasn't just frustration. It was anger, sadness, and disbelief that something so small could spiral into such a demeaning experience. Yet, amidst the whirlwind of emotions, a part of her felt resolved. She wouldn't let this go unanswered. Unbeknownst to her, Marcus was already planning his next steps. When he boarded the flight back home, his mind was laser-focused. By the time he landed, He intended to ensure that justice would be served, not just for Michelle, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly by those meant to protect them. After all, Marcus wasn't just a husband returning to his wife. He was a Delta Force commander, a man whose reputation commanded respect and fear from anyone who dared cross him. The investigation into the officer's conduct gained unstoppable momentum, driven by a combination of public pressure, damning evidence, and Marcus's discreet interventions. Internal affairs investigators worked tirelessly, piecing together a pattern of behavior that painted Officer Daniels and Officer Gray in an increasingly negative light. Past complaints, once ignored or dismissed, were now front and center. Witnesses came forward, recounting similar experiences of intimidation, disrespect, and outright bullying at the hands of the two men. The weight of their misconduct was becoming impossible to ignore. One particularly explosive revelation involved a previous traffic stop eerily similar to Michelle's case. A young Latino man had been pulled over for no clear reason, subjected to verbal abuse, and even handcuffed briefly before being let go without charges. At the time, his complaint had gone nowhere, buried under layers of bureaucracy. But now, with renewed scrutiny on Daniels and Gray, the incident resurfaced as part of the investigation. Video footage from the man's dashboard camera corroborated his account, adding fuel to the growing fire. As the evidence mounted, Daniels and Gray found themselves summoned repeatedly to internal review hearings. Their once cocky demeanor began to crumble under the relentless questioning of seasoned investigators. They stumbled over explanations, contradicted each other, and grew visibly agitated when confronted with specific details about their past actions. For the first time in their careers, they were facing real consequences, and it terrified them. Meanwhile, Marcus continued operating behind the scenes, ensuring that justice remained on track. He coordinated with trusted allies within law enforcement and government agencies, making sure the investigation wasn't derailed by politics or favoritism. Though he avoided direct involvement, his influence loomed large. Investigators knew better than to overlook key pieces of evidence or downplay the severity of the case, not when someone like Marcus Thompson was paying attention. His reputation alone served as a silent guarantee that fairness would prevail. Public outrage reached new heights as more details emerged. Local activists organized marches, demanding accountability not just for Daniels and Gray, but for systemic issues plaguing law enforcement. Social media campaigns amplified Michelle's story, turning her into a symbol of resilience and courage. Parents praised her as a role model for their children. Colleagues admired her determination to fight back. Strangers thanked her for standing up against injustice. The support was overwhelming, but also empowering. For Michelle, the attention was bittersweet. On one hand, she appreciated the solidarity and encouragement from so many people. On the other hand, she couldn't help but feel frustrated that it had taken something this extreme to spark meaningful conversation about police reform. She channeled her emotions into action, speaking at community events and using her platform to advocate for change. Her message was simple yet powerful. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of race, gender, or profession. Finally, after weeks of mounting pressure, the decision came down. Daniels and Gray were suspended indefinitely pending further disciplinary action, including potential criminal charges. The announcement sent shockwaves through the department and the city. Officers who had previously looked the other way now whispered nervously about whether they'd be next. Citizens celebrated the ruling as a small but significant victory in the fight for accountability. For Daniels and Gray, the suspension marked the beginning of a nightmare. Stripped of their badges and guns, they retreated from public view, humiliated and defeated. Friends distanced themselves, fearing association with the disgraced pair. Even family members struggled to reconcile the men they thought they knew with the officers exposed in the investigation. The psychological toll was immense, a fitting punishment for years of unchecked arrogance. At home, Michelle breathed a sigh of relief, though she refused to call it a complete victory. "This isn't just about us," she told Marcus one evening. It's about making sure no one else has to go through what I did. Marcus nodded, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. He admired her strength and resolve, knowing full well that she hadn't needed him to step in. But he was glad he had. Together, they had sent a clear message. Power misused would always face consequences. Though life slowly returned to normal, neither Michelle nor Marcus forgot the lessons learned during those turbulent weeks. Justice might have been served, but the broader fight for equality and fairness was far from over. And if anyone doubted the impact of standing up against wrongdoing, Michelle's story stood as a testament to the power of courage. The next morning, Michelle woke up with a renewed sense of determination. She had always believed in standing up for what was right. But this time, the stakes felt personal. The officers' actions weren't just an attack on her. They were an attack on fairness, respect, and justice. As she sat at the kitchen table reviewing the formal complaint she'd drafted the night before, Marcus quietly joined her, coffee mug in hand. His presence was comforting, like a silent promise that he would handle whatever came their way. Michelle decided to file the complaint officially with the police department's Internal Affairs Division. She knew it wouldn't be easy. Complaints against law enforcement officers often faced resistance or were brushed aside. But she also knew that staying silent would only enable the kind of behavior she'd experienced. With Marcus by her side, she submitted the paperwork, attaching copies of the video footage recorded by bystanders. The videos painted a vivid picture of the officers' misconduct, leaving little room for denial. Word spread quickly after the incident went viral online. Social media platforms lit up with posts about the confrontation, many of them expressing outrage over how Michelle had been treated. Local news outlets picked up the story, amplifying calls for accountability. People from all walks of life, parents whose children Michelle had taught, colleagues who respected her dedication, strangers moved by her courage, rallied around her. Support poured in through messages, emails, and even protests outside the police station. For Michelle, it was overwhelming but empowering to see so many people standing with her. Meanwhile, Marcus worked behind the scenes, ensuring that no detail was overlooked. He reached out to influential figures within government agencies, sharing the evidence he gathered and urging them to take action. Though Marcus never explicitly threatened anyone, his reputation preceded him. Those who received his communications understood the gravity of the situation. They knew Marcus wasn't someone to cross lightly. He was a man whose skills, connections, and resolve made him uniquely capable of dismantling obstacles in his path. Back at the police department, whispers about the case grew louder. Internal Affairs investigators began digging into the officers' backgrounds, uncovering a troubling pattern of misconduct. Past complaints surfaced, accusations of excessive force, racial profiling, and unprofessional behavior, all of which had been swept under the rug due to lack of evidence or systemic bias. Now those past incidents added weight to Michelle's claims, painting a clearer picture of the officers' true nature. For the two officers involved, life seemed eerily normal, at least on the surface. They continued reporting for duty, cracking jokes with coworkers, and patrolling the streets as if nothing unusual had happened. But beneath their bravado, a creeping unease settled in. One of them noticed strange coincidences. His favorite hunting rifle, which he kept proudly displayed in his home, now lay disassembled piece by piece on his front lawn. Another found classified documents detailing his questionable financial dealings taped to his car windshield. Neither officer could explain how these things happened or why, but both felt an unsettling sense of being watched. Marcus hadn't done anything illegal or reckless. Instead, he relied on psychological tactics honed during years of military training. By planting subtle yet unmistakable warnings, he sent a clear message. Accountability was inevitable. The officers might not have known who was behind these eerie signs, but they couldn't shake the feeling that someone powerful was closing in on them. At home, Michelle remained focused on her daily routine, finding strength in the support she received from friends, family, and strangers alike. Teaching became her anchor, a reminder of why she fought so hard for fairness and equality. Still, there were moments when doubt crept in. What if the system failed her again? What if the officers walked away unpunished? Each time those thoughts surfaced, Marcus reassured her. "We're not giving up," he said firmly. "Not until we see real change." As days turned into weeks, the pressure mounted. The officers' superiors called them in for questioning, their faces stern and their questions pointed. Internal affairs investigators dug deeper into their records, leaving no stone unturned. Meanwhile, Marcus ensured that every piece of evidence stayed visible, not just to authorities but to the public eye. He understood the power of transparency and used it strategically to keep the momentum going. Though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. Michelle and Marcus were a team, united in their pursuit of justice. Together, they embodied resilience, determination, and an unwavering belief that doing the right thing mattered, even when it was hard. And